Now, Olivia Pratt-Corbell's killer is beginning a 42-year jail term this morning after being sentenced at Manchester Crown Court yesterday. Olivia's mother, Cheryl, paid tribute to her caring, sassy, chatty girl outside of the court and described life without Olivia as the family's own life sentence.
Olivia was just beautiful with her long brown hair and big brown eyes. She was such a social butterfly. She was particularly good with the younger children and was such a caring little girl. Liv was the light of our lives, a sassy, chatty girl who never ran out of energy. She was a character. She was my baby and she had amazing qualities and knew what she wanted in life. Everyone adored her. She was the baby of our family and my little love, my shadow. We welcome the sentence given, but what I can say is that my family and I have already started our life sentence, having to spend the rest of our lives without Olivia.
Incredible bravery giving that statement. Thomas Cashman, though, failed to come into court to receive the sentence. Justice Amanda Yip described as perhaps further evidence of his lack of remorse for the killing, which has impacted an entire community.
As children do, Olivia was coming downstairs to seek reassurance. Cheryl Corbell should have been able to give that reassurance and to tuck Olivia back into bed. What's happened instead was chilling and strikes fear not only into the immediate community, but also into the minds of other children and their parents. The defendant has not acknowledged his responsibility for Olivia's death and so has demonstrated no remorse. His failure to come into court is perhaps further evidence of that, although I make it clear that this has not caused me to increase his sentence.
Well, yesterday's sentencing has reignited the debate about whether or not defendants should be forced to attend sentencing hearings. Joining us now to discuss that is Farah Naz, who's the aunt of Zara Alina, whose killer also chose not to be in court to hear his sentence. And here in the studio is the criminal lawyer, Craig Mackenzie. Morning to you. Farah, if I could start with you, please. Thanks so much for joining us. When you were in this same situation and the killer in your case wasn't in court to hear the sentence, how did that affect you as a family?
It certainly had an impact on us because we had anticipated the moment that we would be able to look at him when judgment would be passed, so he would be confronted with what he had done. We wanted to be able to see him, listen to what he had done, the details and the impact that it had upon us, to hear our victim impact statement, and we wanted to be able to look at him in the face and for him to see the impact that it had on us. Whether or not, that would have led to any remorse is another matter, but for us to have that opportunity to face the man while he's being faced and confronted by the judgment was very important for us, and it felt like an incomplete process, so that the legal process felt incomplete. Surely the judgment is part of the punishment. To hear the punishment for us felt really, that he needed to hear the punishment felt really important. And I think not for just us as victims, but also for citizens, we need to see that the process will deter further crime. And how can the process feel like a punishment if the convict actually exercises their bit of power, and their bit of power is, I'm not going to attend, and it's the last bit of power that needs to be taken away, certainly in our eyes.
So Farah, sorry to interrupt, so that
Yes.
moment when you were told that he wasn't coming up from the cells, that he wouldn't be in the courtroom to hear the sentence and to hear your victim impact statements, what was that like, that moment for you as a family?
Well, it made us really angry, and it made us feel, it was like a further slap in the face, It was just another attack from him.
Craig, just to bring you in, Dominic Raab has said after meeting Farah that implementing mandatory sentencing in person was the very least victims deserve, a basic principle of British justice. He wants to make sure courts have the power to compel someone who's been convicted of a serious crime to come and face the sentence as it's handed down. For families of victims, that would mean the world, as we've just been hearing, but the practicalities around it are an enormous challenge.
Yeah, I mean, it's the practicalities would essentially be that prisoner being brought into court by force. In those circumstances, I wouldn't imagine someone would be as well behaved as they may otherwise be, and they could well be disruptive, and that could cause even more distress to the families if they were, for example, shouting out and struggling and being restrained. So from a practical point of view, whilst I appreciate the arguments put forward, there are currently measures that the judge can take. The judge can defer the matter to those in control of a defendant's custody. They will do a risk assessment and decide whether force ought to be used, but that doesn't tend to happen due to safety concerns and the fact that there is a risk of disruption and perhaps further distress to the family.
Yeah, Farah, when you heard yesterday that in the case of Olivia Pratt-Corbell, that the killer had also decided not to be in the courtroom, what were your thoughts then towards Olivia's family?
Well, first of all, my deep condolences to Olivia's family, and I felt really sad for them that they weren't able to look at this man who's destroyed their lives and to be able to see him being sentenced. It's a moment where when judgment is passed, it's part of the process of allowing you to also feel like, okay, so this is complete. This man has faced his judgment and now he's going to be confronted by his punishment. I think there are other ways to make the convict come to face their judgment, and that would be to add time to their sentencing, or there can be other ways. And I don't believe for a minute that convicts aren't manhandled in other circumstances. So I don't see why they can't be manhandled in this situation. I understand it would be distressing if a convict came into court shouting, screaming, swearing, but I think the manhandling argument, I'm not sure about that because it doesn't feel like it's consistent. I'm sure that prisoners are manhandled when they move from cell to cell, so I don't know about that. I think there are other ways of doing this, and Claire Waxman, the Victims Commissioner, has been promoting this. Dominic Raab is considering how to do this, and this is one way, is that you add to the sentencing, you add to the punishment.
Is that
otherwise we
Right.
don't have people deterred from committing crimes. If they're just moving from cell to cell, there's nothing really, there's no sense of punishment.
Is that practicable then, increasing the sentence? And also, witness victim statements that we hear, is there any evidence that that's increased the number of convicts deciding to stay down?
Well, I think an increase in the sentence may incentivise some defendants in some cases. I don't think in cases where the sentence is effectively a life sentence with tariffs as high as the one in the instant case is concerned, that it would really make much of a difference, because that person knows that they're getting a life sentence. So an extra few months also is unlikely to incentivise them to attend, but perhaps in some cases it would.
And Farah, you met with Dominic Raab. You said that the conversation felt sincere, you felt that he'd listened to you. What do you want to happen now?
Well, I'd like Dominic Raab to move forward with developing this law to force convicts to face their sentencing. I think that if, convicts have conversations in prisons, they have their own culture, they talk about what they can do and what they can't do. And I think this is handing over power to convicts, to murderers, and it's very important to shift this trend. This is becoming a trend. This is changing the power dynamic in a courtroom that needs to be different.
Craig, I've sat in courtrooms covering sentencing, and sometimes that moment when the defendant hears those victim impact statements from the family is the moment when you see for the first time in a defendant the realisation and the acceptance of what they've done. I just wonder whether it puts the spotlight on them, that the victim impact statements and now cameras in court, maybe that is all putting off defendants, maybe it's kind of too, I'm not trying to excuse it, but is that a combination of those things too much pressure for some defendants to face?
Sure, I think that's probably right. I mean, if they know the cameras are going to be on them, the victim impact statement will be read out, it's perhaps an easy option to hide away in the cell rather than face that scenario. So yes, I think that may well be a contributing factor.
Okay, Craig, Farah, thank you very much indeed. Sorry, Farah, we can't hear you. Just repeat.
Forgive me, but the cameras are on the